a project tool, it's got to be a Gantt chart using Excel. Gantt chart in Excel. And AI is like this amazing sort of, it's like an intern. It's like an assistant who never gets tired. And every time you say, give me another list of 10, it just goes, okay.
That's Chris Croft, best-selling author, world-renowned management trainer, and one of the most watched instructors on LinkedIn Learning. And he's here to rethink how we manage projects in 2025. Welcome back to the DesignRush podcast, where we sit down with industry leaders to talk strategy, execution, and the tools behind today's top business decisions. I'm your host, Kia Johnson. In this episode, Chris breaks down why so many projects fail before they even begin, and how a humble Gantt chart can save time, money, and momentum. You'll learn how to replan from where you are right now, how visual tools can align teams in minutes, and why confidence is the real key to successful delivery. We also explore how AI fits into modern workflows, what to look for when hiring agencies or freelancers, and why structured communication is every leader's superpower. Whether you're a project manager, startup founder, or executive decision maker, this episode will help you plan smarter and lead better. Watch the full conversation on YouTube or listen on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And don't forget to subscribe. Chris, you've personally trained over 87,000 professionals in person. You've worked with executives, business leaders, and major organizations. I mean, on top of that, you've been talking about your online courses, 40 plus online courses. I mean, you've reached millions worldwide, and it's earned you a spot as a top 10 video trainer globally. I mean, that's pretty amazing. Do you think you can share some of the most noteworthy professionals or organizations that you've trained, people or even companies, that like really stood out to you?
But people I've trained, I started out doing loads of stuff for local government and NHS people and sort of that kind of thing. And then I've done stuff for loads of little companies who you won't have heard of. There are some big names like Lotus, who make those lovely cars, and Sunseeker, who make speedboats. I've done things for them, and Name Audio, who make the best hi-fi. I've done quite a lot of training for ISS, who are the fourth biggest company in the world, but no one's ever heard of them. And they do contract services like cleaning and grounds maintenance and all the unglamorous things. And they are massive. They employ 500,000 people. And I've done a whole load for them. Go Ahead, who run buses. GMC, that's the General Medical Council. But the biggies, I've done quite a lot for something called Vistage or Vistage. And that's a managing directors club. So groups of managing directors meet up and they get speakers in to help them with whatever problem they've got. And quite often they get me in because it's to do with project management. But the ones I'm most proud of all, actually the big two, are LinkedIn Learning and Udemy. So LinkedIn Learning is the biggest online. And so most of the people I've reached, all those millions, have been via LinkedIn Learning, but also a lot via Udemy. So Udemy is the biggest place in the world for buying online courses. And if you go there and just put in leadership or negotiating, I come out number one in the world, which I can't believe. But you can see the numbers on there. You can see how many courses have been bought from me, how many viewers I've had. I don't get all the money. Udemy get a big chunk of it, of course. But that's great. I'm happy with that. So LinkedIn Learning and Udemy are my biggest customers now. Before then, it was probably Vistage, who are, they're a very discerning audience. If you're training managing directors, you've got to know what you're talking about. And somehow I've managed to get away with being their speaker for both project management and time management, because those two subjects are kind of linked, I think, project management and time management.
It's so interesting, I'm just seeing this and I'm envisioning you within these spaces. You really gotta love what you're doing.
I mean, yesterday was a nice sunny day, and I had nothing particularly happening, so I went down to the beach, and I'm a bit pink coloured today. I sat in the sunshine down in my beach hut that I rent from the council, and I was there in my deck chair, but I was sitting there just thinking about stuff. And I came up with a great idea for a negotiating pathway process, because negotiating always has rules like, don't open first and don't use round numbers or whatever. But it doesn't tell you do this. And if they do that, do this. But if they do that, do this. And so I've made a flow diagram for negotiating that I'm going to make into a course, because I don't think anyone's ever done that. So if somebody makes an offer to you, should you ask for a better offer from them, or should you put in a counter offer of your own? And I know the answer to that, but most people don't, and that's never been written down. So I think the answer is I'm always thinking about stuff. And if I get an hour free to sit around in the sunshine, my head is spinning with ideas about negotiating or project management. And, I've got this obsession with Agile and how I don't think Agile is as good as proper project management for most things. And I'm busy writing a proper explanation of why I think that. Because I put out the occasional post about Agile isn't the answer, and people get quite heated about it. People who like Agile really love it.
Yeah.
It's sort of like a religion almost to them. And I want to write a proper anti-manifesto. Agile has a manifesto saying this is why it's great, but I want to write a Gantt manifesto saying no, this is what's really good. So I do passionately believe it to the point where I'm prepared to argue over it. And I am thinking about it all the time. But I think to be good at something, you've got to be obsessed with it, haven't you? Almost to being a bit weird, really. And I'm obsessed with Gantt charts and negotiating and bad bosses, because I can't bear all the terrible management. I've had quite a few bad bosses. And so part of the stuff I'm teaching is a sort of campaign to try to get better management into the world. But I know I'm only a little stone in the great big ocean. I just go plop and I disappear. There's a few ripples, but nevertheless, you've got to do your bit, haven't you? And if 1 million people watch one of my courses, that could actually make a bit of a difference.
What I want to find out from you is, have you ever had someone come back to you and say, yo, Chris, your training completely changed my career? Not in that exact tone, but you get what I'm saying. Have you ever had that happen?
Yes. The answer is I get it every day. On a typical day, about 5,000 people view my stuff. And like one person in 5,000 likes it enough or takes the time to send me a message. So every day I get messages saying, oh my God, your course has really changed. Oh my God. And that is so nice. And I never expected that. I think people who write books probably don't get very many messages, because how do you send a message to an author? It's quite difficult. But online video training, you're there on LinkedIn and they can just send it. So yeah, I get messages. A lot of them are not, I now know how. Then they tend to be, I've realized I can do it and you've given me the confidence to do it. And a lot of these things are actually seem to be more about confidence. But if you tell people how, they then become confident. But they don't tend to go, oh, I always wondered how to cope with overlapping tasks in a project. They don't say that. They just go, I'm going to be a project manager. I had one only a few days ago saying, thanks to you, I applied for PMP, which is the best qualification. And I've just passed the exam and I've now got PMP. And they said, I'd never have done it if it hadn't been for you. And so I've really changed that person's life, haven't I? Which is fantastic. So, so I do get those messages all the time. When I used to do face-to-face training, I would turn up for a day, talk about project management to 20 people and drive away again. And I would never really know if they had done it. And I suspected most of them probably didn't, but a few did. It was worth it in the hope that a few did. But so I never really knew. But now I'm doing videos, although I'm more detached and I don't meet the people, I do get more thank yous. And I love the thank yous. Keep them coming, people. Keep them coming. And it makes all the effort worthwhile, because otherwise you're just throwing stuff out there. Yes. And like we said, it goes plop into the ocean and you think, did it make a difference? So it's really nice to hear from one of the fish that it's hit them on the head.
Nice. So, Chris, I want us to actually now move the conversation to what you were speaking about, which is project management. So here's the scenario, okay? If we handed you a completely chaotic project today, one that is over budget, it's behind schedule, it's riddled with client demands, what would be the first thing that you do to regain control?
I think the first thing is I would plan it from now, from where it is. So I would say, we've done this much. Probably should have done more, but this is what we've done, so that's done. But what's the plan for doing all the rest from now on? How long do we think it will take, and what will it cost from here? and I would make that plan. And I would involve my team as well, involve as many people as you can in the planning. So get them to list all the tasks. There might be a list of tasks or there might not, so there might be a terrible plan or no plan, but whatever. So I would come up with a good plan starting now, involve everybody. And it would finish with a Gantt chart of what's going to happen when and who's going to do it. So we would know you're doing that for the next month, you're doing that for the next 2 months, etc. So and everybody will be there and everybody would agree the plan. And almost certainly it would need extra time and money compared to the original plan that's gone wrong. So the customer would have to agree the extra time and the money. And obviously you're in quite a strong position if you're just taking over a project, because you can say, look, if you want me to do this, you're going to have to give me a bit longer and it's going to cost a bit more. So do you want me to sort this out or not? And that's the time when you've got to be strong. You definitely mustn't take over a crazy project and promise that you can still do it within the time and within the budget, because they've already wasted quite a lot of the time and money. That's gone. So that's what I would do. I would plan it from now with a Gantt chart, agreed by everybody, including the extra time and money, and then monitor it really carefully from then on. A 2-minute description of what a Gantt chart is. The first thing I would say is before you do the Gantt chart, you need to do post-it notes. And this is something that people don't realize. So all you do, you just write every task on a post-it note and you just stick them on a piece of paper or just on the table or on a whiteboard in order. So the order you're going to do things. Okay, so you know that this has to be before this and this one comes after this, and you can't do this one until you've done, let's say, both of these. And then when you finish both of those, you've finished or something. So you just get the post-it notes in whatever order. Okay. Now that's quite a fun thing to do. You can do it with a group of people. You should do it with a group of 2 or 3 other people, and you can get that, right? So each of those post-its has got the name of what it is on there. But you also put how long you think they'll take, how many weeks. All right. So let's suppose you've got 2 weeks, 3 weeks, I don't know, 4 weeks, 2 weeks, 1 week, and 1 week, or something like that. Okay. So then you can look at that and you can work out how long the whole thing will take. And the whole thing will take the longest path. So this one that I've just randomly done, the longest path is actually along the bottom there, isn't it? So it goes, it's 2, 4, 2, and 1. Okay. You don't have to worry about the 3 because that's going to happen during the 4. And you don't have to worry about the 1 because that can happen during the 2. So you know the whole thing is just 2, 4, 2, 1, which is 9 weeks. Okay. So that's the preparation you have to do before you do your Gantt chart. And because people don't do that, they find Gantt charts difficult. So now we can do the Gantt chart. And then the Gantt chart, we know the whole job's going to take 9 weeks. So we can have a 9-week sort of scale, if you like.
Yeah. It looks a bit like a timeline, Yeah.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah, the Gantt chart is really just the timeline.
Yeah.
And then the first thing we do is we put on just the longest ones. So we put on that 2 that we had, and then we put on the 4, and then we put on the 2, and then we put on the 1. And that's known as the critical path. It's the time critical path is what it really is, because these tasks might be quite trivial, but just slow. So we're just looking for, if you like, the slowest tasks. So that's really easy, just the 2, 4, 2, and 1, right? And then we just put in the other tasks. So we know, for example, the 3, it comes after this 2, and it comes before this 2. So somewhere in here, we're doing the 3. And similarly, this 1, it comes after this 3, and it comes before this last one here. Does this one here comes in between this 3 and this 1. So in here, we've got this 1. Okay, so those are known as floating tasks, and my Gantt chart is done now. That's it, finished. The point is, but what I wanted to say is that it would be very hard to draw this from just a list of tasks, because you have to know the critical path and then the other ones hang off it. But once you know the running order, it's really easy to draw it out to scale and just say, well, it's these. And then, we know, for example, that this could be January, February, March, or whatever we've got on here. We now know we're doing this in January, this in February, and these ones in March. And these ones can move a little bit. There's a bit of a choice. They could be anywhere between the end of January and the end of February sort of thing. This one here could be anywhere in the beginning of March sort of thing. And also we know which tasks to concentrate on, because these ones can take a bit longer, it doesn't matter. But these ones have to be done right or the whole project will go late.
It's almost like a priority slash time management type of chart in essence, because from
Yes.
what I'm understanding is that it just gives you this visual. And I think as human beings, we're such visual people. So we sometimes have to tap into that. And when you see it in front of
Mm.
you, you start really understanding where you're at in your business, where you need to go. Okay, something's happened here. What do I do? How do I tackle this? And almost take it in
Well,
a step by step. It's like a phase
yeah.
by phase or a step by
Yes.
step type of scenario.
People say to me, "Oh, I don't want to do any project planning. It'll take too long." But that was like 2 minutes. It's, now in real life, you might have 20 tasks. It might take you half an hour, but that's time well spent. And it might take you another 15 minutes to draw this. But then everyone can see the plan, and then you can monitor, are we keeping up? So by the end of February, we should have done these two, but have we? So we know if we're running late, so we know where we are. And you can say, Kia, that's you there. So you need to keep March free because you're going to be doing this task at the beginning of March. So don't go on holiday, Kia. And everyone knows what the plan is. And I think as soon as you've got more than one person doing something, even just two people on a project, you need to have something drawn out so that everybody can see who's doing what. Am I doing this or are you? I thought you were doing this bit. So you have to have this, and you can put people's names on these, of course, so everybody knows who's doing what.
It's really
You'd
great
be
because
mad
it's
not to, wouldn't you? You'd be mad
it's
not to.
exactly, it's a type of an alignment as well, so like you were just talking about that sort of miscommunication. Oh, were you supposed to do it? Oh no, and it just would provide the clarity as well, and then just give you a better sort of holistic view moving forward. Even though, I'm saying holistic in inverted commas here because we are doing this sort of step by step, but in doing so, you are then covering all aspects in essence as well. Oh, this is brilliant. Thank you, Chris, for sharing.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Amazing. Okay, so now talking about just the question that I had to you about, you got this completely chaotic project and that, right? So now you've managed to gain this control. So how would you then manage maintaining that control once you've regained it? Would the chart then be something that already does facilitate that process and keep you in that sort of sustainable, forward moving factor?
Yes. So you've got to control the time and the money. And controlling the time is easy because all you do, let's suppose, 5 weeks have gone, 1, 2, 3, 4, say, you have a thing called the now line, and that just moves along every week. It just moves along because that's where we are. And then you color in what you've done. So suppose we've done this and half of that. You can see we're not keeping up because we should have done 2/3 of that. And also we should have done 2/3 of that one by now. So if it looks like that, it's okay. So from the point of view of time, a coloured in Gantt chart tells you. So if I only had 1 minute to check on somebody's project, even if it was a really complicated project that I knew nothing about, I could say to them, can I have a look at your coloured in Gantt chart? And in 10 seconds, I can see whether they're keeping up or not. And then I can say, so you're behind on this task here, whatever it is. What are you going to do about that? Are you going to catch it up or what's happened? So for monitoring time, you have to have a coloured in Gantt chart, and there is no other way that's ever been found. Monitoring the money is a little bit more tricky, but you absolutely should monitor the amount that you spend as you go along, and you monitor what you've actually spent compared to what you should have spent. So if you're overspending. but the main thing that's the main thing that's tricky about monitoring the money is that different things cost different amounts in projects.
Yes.
So accountants normally monitor departments, which cost the same every month because it's the same people being paid. But projects can vary hugely. You might be buying a whole lot of equipment or something, or you might just be digging holes, which are quite cheap but take ages. So the thing is, the project will tell you, the project plan, basically this. Suppose this is expensive. Suppose it's going to cost us 90. Right? And suppose this is very cheap and it's only going to cost us, let's say, 10. So we know by the time we get to here, we should have spent 90. And by the time we get to here, we should have spent 100. You see what I mean? And so if we get to here and we've spent 90, that's great. if we get to here and we've spent 180, then that's a problem because it should have only been another 10. So
And then you're in
we
that
need to know.
deficit. Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
this chart allows you to do that because by looking at what these things are, you can work out whether we're going to be spending a lot or a little. But if you don't have this, you don't know how much you're meant to spend in March. You can look at what you've actually spent, but you have to compare it with what you should have spent. And this is the only way to know what you should have spent. Yeah, but it's dead easy to have. Once you got it, you can use it to monitor as well. So you not only agree your plan, but you then monitor your
You can actually
plan as you go along.
monitor that. Yeah, definitely. So I'm
Yeah.
curious to find out from you then, Chris. I mean, is there a time when you saw an absolute disaster in terms of like, a project turnaround? So like a disaster transforming into like this amazing success story. Is there anything that you can share with us? Any examples of that?
Not really. I wish I did. Well, I think the problem is, I mean, I have seen disasters, but the problem is organizations don't usually change. And sometimes they get me in, there's been a disaster and they get me in to do training and I do a load of training and they'll go, oh, brilliant, brilliant. We know what we'll do now. And then from then on, they've got a system and they've got a common language and that's great. But I haven't seen a project change from halfway through because usually I wouldn't see that. And companies really struggle to change their culture. So if they've got a culture of not planning or not communicating or battles between departments, then that's what's going to happen. I've seen lots of bad project plans, by the way. I mean, half the plans I've seen have nothing. And then about 10%, well, probably 20% have just a list of tasks of these are all the things we're going to do. But they don't know how long they're going to take. They don't know which ones are critical and which ones are floating. They don't know who's doing what. It's just a list of tasks. And then some of them have a Gantt chart, but it's not based on this. So they just sort of put in roughly when they think they're going to do things, which is all right, but you don't know what's critical and what isn't. So I would say probably only 10% of the projects I look at have a proper Gantt chart. And in fact, what I think one of the big causes of failure with projects is people, well, there's probably two main causes actually. One of them is they don't have it clearly enough at the start. So they just say, let's make a new website. We need a new website or whatever. And then the project manager makes a new website and they go, oh, well, no, that's not what we want. I mean, that's, you've missed out a bit over there and that's too detailed and we didn't want it that color. And they should have agreed it at the start. So, and I know that with Agile, for example, there's a lot of people say, well, let's just start anyway. And we'll sort those details out later as we go along. And I think that's really dangerous because you can go down an alley and spend lots of money doing something that isn't the right way to go. So you've got to have that discipline at the start to just stop and everybody discusses, what are we going to have? I want this. Yeah, but I want this. So what are we going to do? And everybody has to agree what we're going to have before we start. And it only takes a day just to have that big debate. But oh no, they want to wade in. And I think the other problem that happens is that people trust software too much. So they just feed everything into a computer and they just say, here's all the tasks and here's the time. And, just stick it into sort of Microsoft Project or something. And the computer goes, 6 months. And they believe that. And because you don't know what the computer has done, it's probably wrong. The computer probably doesn't know, that you're not available because they don't know who, maybe there are two tasks that can only be done by you and they're both at the same time. And the computer doesn't know you're the only person who can do them. So it will schedule them in parallel and then they won't happen or whatever. And the computer, unless you give it absolutely every detail, its plan will be wrong and you're never going to give it all the details. So that's why I like Excel, because with Excel, you can see it in front of you. With this, you've got Post-it notes that you can see, and then you've got an Excel spreadsheet. You can look at it and you can think, yeah, that makes sense to me. But if you just put everything into a computer and it spews out a massive Gantt chart with 100 lines and it's really complicated, your brain can't tell whether it's right or not. And I've noticed with Microsoft Project, if you change something, just change one task, it rejigs everything. It just goes, poof, new plan, and everything's different. and you just think, what have you done? What's gone? And you don't know what it's doing in its little brain. And I think that's quite dangerous. So I always want the plan to be something I can look at and understand myself when I'm looking at it, just like a sanity check, really. So I think trusting computers when you don't know what they're doing is quite risky. I'm not anti-computers, but you've got to know what it's doing.
As a support system, it's a great thing to have when you do need to get
Yeah.
some things done. But then
Yeah.
final input must always be you. You must
Yes.
always be the person who does the final input on everything. So go through it, have a look. Does it really align? Does it really fit? Is this really what's going to work for my organization? Okay, is this
Yeah.
something that I can actually present to the team? Is this even my speak? How would I actually, and then change that around to suit that and just use it as that support. So I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. Well, one other thing actually just occurred to me, which is I've been to quite a few companies where they make a really impressive, lovely, detailed plan, Gantt chart, everything, because they have to put that in the proposal in order to win the work. So they have this great big project plan up front, and the customer goes, "Yes, I love that," and they get the job, and then they just throw the Gantt chart away, and they don't use it to monitor the progress. They don't do the colouring in bit, and yet that is kind of the best bit, and it's the easiest bit because it's so easy just to say we've done that and we've done half of that. But they don't do that, and I find that almost impossible to understand. But I've seen it a lot. They do the Gantt chart because the customer insists on it for the proposal, and then they just don't look at it after that. So I think that's another reason why projects go wrong, is that they don't monitor it closely enough during. And then, they get to the end. Imagine if you were doing, let's suppose it was a 5-year project and you were going to spend £1 million a year. So it's going to be £5 million, right? And imagine if you were going at half speed and double cost, right? So imagine that at the end of the first year, you'd only done 6 months worth, but you'd still spent your $1 million, right? The accountants wouldn't know, because at the end of the year, you've spent $1 million and they're going, yep, that's fine. And at the end of the next year, 2 years have gone now, you've spent $2 million, but you've only done 1 year's worth. But nobody really knows. All the accountants know is you've spent $2 million. So when you get to the end of the 5 years, you've spent $5 million. The accountants go, great, that's that done. And you go, no, it's not finished. We've only done half of it. And they go, what? And you go, oh, yeah, we've had loads of problems, didn't you know? And they go, well, how much more is it going to cost? And you say, well, about another 3 million to finish it. And they go, what? And so suddenly, it's all in the papers and people get fired. And you think, how on earth could they have lost 3 million? And it's because they didn't really lose them. They spent the money as planned, but they didn't do the progress as planned. So they're left with 3 million quid's worth of work still to do. I mean, they're lucky it wasn't 5. But the thing is, if they'd been monitoring, if they'd known in that first year you'd spent $1 million, but you'd only done half of the progress, then they'd have known there was a problem. But the accountants don't see the Gantt chart. They only see the spend. So to not use a Gantt chart to monitor your progress, it'll come back and bite you, both on the progress, but also on the money. So, and I've seen loads of companies who don't colour in their Gantt charts, and I just think,
Yes.
that's so dangerous. What are you doing?
Yeah.
It's great that there's such an easy answer, because it's such a difficult problem and such an easy answer. And that's what I love about doing training, because I can say to people, look at this. It's really easy and it works. And they go, whoa, why did nobody tell me about that 20 years ago? And I go, I know. So it's really great, isn't it? It is great.
Amazing. It's amazing. Chris, I want to find out also from you, just in terms of delivering projects and speaking to budget and things like that. What is the number one misconception that people have about actually delivering projects on time and within budget in your experience that you've come across?
I think probably that it's difficult. Or that it'll take a lot of time. I think they think, well, to plan this, it's going to take months and there's going to be maths and actually it's not. Get a list of tasks, put them on Post-it notes, estimate the times, which is a bit of a guess, but people are pretty good at estimating if you ask the right people. Draw it out as a chart. It's easy. And I think that's the big misconception. And of course, thinking it's difficult leads to people not doing it at all. And they think, well, for this quite small project, it's not worth having a plan because it'll take too long. And if only they had had a little simple plan, it would have been so much better. So I think that's what I would have as the misconception. I mean, if I was allowed a second one, I would say, thinking that Agile's the answer. Because with Agile, you more or less make it up as you go along. Every 2 weeks, they go, right, what have we done? What should we do next? And then 2 weeks later, okay, what have we done? What should we do next? And so that's like driving your car without a map and going, where are we? Okay, where should we go next? Where are we now? Without zooming out and saying, here's the overall plan of where we're going. And I just think, it comes from the same source of believing that planning is difficult. And yes, planning is not perfect. Things will change, but you at least should start with a plan, I think, wouldn't you say? There are two ways you can do it. One is you have a very detailed plan for the first bit. And then beyond that, it's a bit more hazy. We know roughly how long the bits will take. And as we get nearer, we plan them in more detail. You could do that. Yeah. Or you could have the whole thing planned. And it depends what it is. I mean, if you're going to build a house and you know that in week number 33, you're going to need a crane, you can't really wait and see till you get there, because you've got to book the crane a couple of months ahead probably. So you need to know that's the date when we're going to need the crane. And then you just make sure that everything's on schedule. And if you run late a bit, then you have to do a bit of overtime, work the weekend to keep up, because you have to be ready for the crane when the crane's coming. But if you're doing Agile where you don't have a plan, or only a very vague plan, then that's not good enough if you have to book things like cranes. But then if something happens and, let's suppose there's COVID, or it snows, or there's a big disaster like a fire or something like that, then you're now a month behind schedule, and you can ring up the crane people and say, look, I'm really sorry, we're a month behind schedule. Can we move the crane? And maybe you have to pay a bit to do that, but at least So if you've got a plan, when something changes, at least it's very easy to make a new plan, and the effect. So quite often in projects, the customer says, oh, by the way, could you do some extra stuff? And you don't say, no, I've got a plan. You don't say that. You say, yeah, great idea. I could definitely do that, but it will cost a bit more, because it's extra work. And that's great, because it's win-win. They get what they want. We get paid a bit more. Everybody's happy. So you say it will cost a bit more, and it will take a little bit longer to put this extra bit in. We're going to have to move this lot to the right here, because you're inserting into here. So we'll move it all a bit along. But of course, the thing is, we know the effect on the time and the money of the thing they're asking for. And they may go, oh, well, in that case, no, we don't want it after. If it's going to cost that much and take that much extra time, then we don't want it after all. So thank goodness we didn't do it. But, we can decide, do we want to do this or not, based on actual facts. But if you don't have a plan, you end up adding things in, and it all just gets messy, and no one really knows the effect of the things you've added in. And then when you get to the end, the customer goes, this is more expensive than I was hoping for, and this has taken longer than I thought. And you can't say, well, yeah, that's because you added in those extra things. No one really knows, and it all just ends up in sort of blame and recriminations, and it's all a bit unhappy at the end, rather than we did it.
Who are up to 3 people who shape the way you approach leadership, execution, and project success within the industry? And what would you say was the biggest lesson that you learned from each of them?
Ooh, well, I'm going to name people who you won't have heard of, but very briefly, 3 people. The first one that definitely springs to mind was a guy called David Stankham. I don't even know if he's still alive. I hope he is. David, if you're out there, because he was quite a bit older than me, and I'm quite old now. But he was brought in to turn around a company that was losing money. And he brought me in to be in charge of the factory, because running factories was what I started out doing. And I learned from him to be really ruthless, actually, about people who aren't great. He said, get rid of the 40%ers. So if you've got somebody who's 40% good enough, so they're just slightly below average, get rid of them. And I remember he got rid of one guy who I thought was quite good. And I thought, well, that's a bit harsh. He's all right. But he replaced him by somebody who was really good. And so we had a team of about 6 of us. We had a salesperson, marketing, finance, and everybody was really good. And it just felt fantastic. It's the only time I've ever been in a really perfect team where everybody was enthusiastic and they knew what they were talking about. And we absolutely motored. It was so good. And it was all because David Stankham was really ruthless about, he didn't tolerate people who were just passengers or, doing the minimum to get away with it. And the world's full of people like that. So I think, having a really good team, because it only takes one person to hold the whole thing back. So I learned that from him. The second person was a guy called Bob Smallcombe. And again, Bob, if you're out there hearing this, he smoked a pipe the whole time. So I don't know about Bob's health. I hope you're all right, Bob. But what I learned from him, he was a very down-to-earth guy. I don't think he had many qualifications, didn't have a degree or anything like that. He just learned it all practically on the job. And his big thing was keeping it really simple. And I think that's probably where I got the idea of using Excel for my Gantt charts, because he used to just have a little chart of who's meant to have done what and have they done it. And he would have a meeting every week, and you were in trouble if you hadn't done what you should have done, And he just kept it really simple. And he'd somehow worked out just what the key things were to measure. And everything else, he'd say, that's up to you. You can decide how you want to do it. But you said you do it by this week, and you haven't done it. And I think just keeping it really simple, I think, and so I learned that from him. And I because unless you can actually see a picture of it, then it's going to get out of control and you won't know even why. So I learned that from him. The third person, it's difficult. I mean, I'm tempted to say Alan Sugar on The Apprentice. I don't know whether you've ever watched The Apprentice, and just do the opposite of everything they do on The Apprentice. Because The Apprentice is terrible. They just do everything wrongly on there. The job interviews, they're really aggressive to people, which is not good. And the sales tasks, they just go around shouting at people about their products, which is not good. And then when they brainstorm, they come up with ideas, but they're all criticizing each other's ideas as soon as they come up with them, which you're not supposed to do with a brainstorm. You're meant to welcome every idea and judge them later. So I end up shouting at the telly if I watch The Apprentice. So, I think, but actually I have learned quite a lot from bad bosses. By the way, Alan Sugar may be absolutely fine outside. I mean, it's just a TV program, isn't it? So maybe that's not really him.
Character.
I don't know.
Yeah, maybe it's just his character.
Maybe
yeah.
I'll give him that get out. But but I had a boss called Harry, who is dead now, so I can say. But he was a terrible boss, and I won't name his second name, but he was called Harry. And he was just a real bully, and he just criticized people all the time. And I was secure enough in myself by the time I worked for him that he didn't get me down. But he would do things like he'd get me in the office and say, I pay you all this money and I don't think you're worth it. And things like that, And one time he said that to me and I said, well, I'll prove I am. And I came back with a list of all the things I'd done that year, all the money I'd saved him, something like £500,000, all the changes I'd made. I was in charge of the factory. I'd made loads of savings, cutting down on waste and running the machines with fewer men and all sorts of things. And he just said, well, those things would probably have happened anyway. And you just think, what can you say to a guy like that? And I think what I learned from him is that criticizing people just doesn't work. It just makes them go into their shell and do less. And in the short time I worked for him, I just did less and less. And by the end, I was doing pretty much nothing because everything you did got criticized. What was the point, And in the end, he said to me, do you want to just have 6 months pay and go? And I went, yes. So that was that. He was just a really nasty man. But I want to thank him officially actually here because he was the final straw for me because I thought I'm sick of running factories for ungrateful bosses. I'm going to go and be a university lecturer instead. And I did, and I loved it. And so I think even a bad boss can teach you that maybe there's something better out there, and you deserve better than a bad boss. And to anybody who's watching this, whose boss makes them unhappy, whoever's fault it is, almost doesn't matter. Maybe they just don't fit in that particular job role. Try something else, and maybe Harry was right. Maybe I wasn't a very good factory manager. I mean, I think I was okay, but I think I was a better university lecturer than I was factory manager, and the lecturing led me on to being a trainer and doing what I do now, which is I think what I was born to do really. So thank you, Harry, beyond the grave. for being so horrible to me. I can laugh about it now. But he was horrible to lots of other people who weren't as strong-minded as me. I think he ruined a lot of people's lives. I think a boss can ruin people's lives.
Yes.
Bosses have got a lot of responsibility. And, that's one of my obsessions I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, that people like him shouldn't be allowed to be in charge of other people's lives.
Yeah.
It's bad.
That's actually a huge responsibility as well. I mean, if, just from what you're telling me, I think that you've actually probably had a couple of these lessons that have influenced the way that you teach leadership in your own training programs, because you have kind of touched on those. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Wow. So, Chris, I mean, you yourself, I was talking about mentors that have made impression on your life, right? But you're also a mentor as well. You've trained thousands of leaders. I'd love to find out from you if you can share a success story where a leader actually applied your training and then saw a significant transformation in how they manage projects or lead their teams. Do you have a success story like that to share with me?
Well, can I answer that in a bit of a weird way, which is to say that I have done a bit of one-to-one coaching. But I think of myself more as a trainer than a coach. And I think they're really different. I think everyone should get a coach or a mentor. Coaches and mentors, I think, are similar, by the way. I think mentors are just a bit more to do with your career and your bigger picture of your life, whereas coaching's more about problems you have right now. But coaching and mentoring, I think, are very similar. I think training's completely different. So trainers are people like me who turn up, tell you a load of useful stuff, and they go again. And there's not that much of a relationship, really. I'll never know whether you do it. And my video courses are the ultimate training, because you watch the video call. I don't even know who you are. I don't even, I don't have any relationship with you, really. Whereas coaching is like a one-to-one thing, and you meet up every month and you ask, how are you doing? And I tend to avoid doing coaching because I know I'm not very good at it. I'm much better at training. I'm really good at just turning up, being inspirational, giving you stuff and going again. But coaching, I find quite difficult because you have to be a listener as a coach. And I'm not very good at listening. I'd much rather tell you stuff. I know it's bad, but that's how I am. You've got to know your strengths and your weaknesses.
But you know who you are, it's fine.
And you probably think I'd be a lovely, lovely coach, but actually I wouldn't, because I would forget what we talked about last time. And then I found you haven't done it and I'd be a bit impatient. So I would recommend a coach, but not me. But I did do one bit of coaching that worked really well. I'll just quickly tell you about this. I'm going to call this bloke David because that's his name. And he's managing director of a large estate agency. And he's quite scary. He's very intelligent and quite scary. And he said to me, Chris, come in and do some training for my team because they're rubbish. And I went, oh, all right, David. So I turned up and I did this training for his team, and his team seemed really good. And at the end, he said to me, you see what I mean? They're rubbish, aren't they? And I said to him, maybe it's you. But I did it very diplomatically, and which is rare for me. And I said to him, I can see what you mean, but I actually think you could probably get more from them if you manage them using some different techniques.
Okay.
And he said, are you saying I'm a bad boss? And I said, well, no, but I just think there are some things that you could do that you don't know about that could work. And he went, right, tell me what they are. So I said, well, let's meet once a month for an hour or so, and I'll gradually talk you through these things and you can try them and we'll see if they work. And he went, okay. And I'll just tell you about one thing I taught him. Because what he tends to do, if he discovers a mistake that somebody's made, he will explode and he'll shout at them and rip them into shreds of they're an idiot. How could they have done that? And he was telling me about somebody who'd done something stupid. And I said to him, why did that guy do that? And he went, I don't know. He's just an idiot. And I said, but he's not an idiot, is he? There must be a reason why he's done that. Maybe there was the numbers were wrong on the system, or maybe he didn't understand what you wanted, or, and I said, unless you can find out why he's done it, you won't be able to fix it for next time. And he went, interesting, he said. So I gave him the challenge to not explode for a month. When you find something wrong, don't explode. Just say to them, why have you done this? Just calmly, why have you done this? So when I went to see him a month later, I said, how have you been getting on? And he said, God, it's been difficult. he said, the number of times I've wanted to explode, he said, but he said, I found out loads of stuff. People have told me all these, I've discovered things wrong with the system. People are overlapping in their tasks. He said, I've discovered loads. It's been brilliant. And he said, what I've really liked is I feel in control now, because when I explode at somebody, I don't really feel fully in control, and they slink away, but I don't really know if they're going to do anything differently next time.
Yeah.
But he said, now I find out why and I fix it, and I know I've fixed it. And he said, it feels great. So I taught him not to explode. And that's such a simple thing. He's got a degree in maths. He's super bright. And yet he'd never really thought that there might be a better way than shouting at people. And so often these really clever bosses, I've taught bosses to thank people. They didn't realize that was important. And I've also taught bosses to delegate, because they don't like to let go because other people won't do it as well as them. And I go, yeah, but that's a waste of you. And they go, yeah, you're right, really. And so simple things like thanking and delegating and not exploding, but asking why. I think, I probably could be a coach. But I'd rather make videos and put them out and for millions of people to watch them than spend time doing one-to-one stuff, because it's so time consuming, isn't it?
Yeah. I love
That's
that you're so honest.
I hope that's a good answer to your coaching question.
It's a lovely example. Thank you so much for sharing that. I actually now wanted to find out from you, and I'm just wondering, if, for example, I would like to immediately apply like one of your most powerful leadership principles, like where would I start? And now you just used this example of, why, in the scenario that you were painting the picture of to me. So is there anything specific, or do you feel that when you are actually, in terms of just, the training that you offer and what you do, that it would just be either that person takes the information that you are giving them and they can then apply them and customize them according to their needs and requirements in that space? Or are there like a list that you would say, this is like a must-do list. This is a must-have. You got to have these 3 core things. You got to have these 10 core things. Yes,
if you're a manager?
Maybe expand on that. Yeah, if you're like a leader, a manager, yes, exactly. Yeah. In an executive position. Yeah.
Well, a couple of answers. I think one of them is vision, systems, and people. So a leader's got to have a vision of where we're going, and they've got to be good at the people side, communicating with people and motivating people towards that vision. But there's also systems of how the people fit together, so nothing falls through the cracks of who's doing what. I don't mean computers necessarily, but how will that machine of people work to go towards the vision? And so, if you look at our current Prime Minister here in the UK, Keir Starmer, I don't know what his vision is. I think he's very good on systems, but he hasn't really provided a vision. And then the people side, he's not a great communicator. He struggles to communicate. We've had a few people like that, I think, like Theresa May was really, I think, a very nice person, but not a natural communicator. Somebody like Tony Blair, regardless of politics, was a very good communicator. So I think, a good leader is a good communicator with the people, but also they look at the systems. So Boris Johnson was a great communicator of people and sort of had a vision, I think, but the systems were just all over the place. Nothing was organized.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think those are the 3 things: vision, systems, and people. But if I was going to drill down to a bit more, I would say there are 2 things. I think you've got to delegate as a manager or a leader. My biggest regret was I didn't delegate enough. Because I'm a control freak and I want things to be right, and and I don't trust other people when I should, and all sorts of stupid reasons, really. But all the reasons to not delegate are false, because you can delegate and you can monitor, you can check they're doing it correctly, so it's not going to go wrong. But I think delegating is the number 1 skill you've got to learn as a manager. You can't do it all yourself. And then I think a subset of that is thanking people. Because if you delegate but you never thank, and often bosses go, well, if I don't thank them, that means if I don't tell them off, that means they've done it right. And not being told off is not enough. You've got to actually positively thank people. Well, I'll tell them if they don't do it right. And what more do they want? They're being paid. And the answer is they want to be thanked as well as paid. And so I think thanking is free and it's easy, and why would you not? I think you've got to thank everybody every week for something real that they've done as well. You mustn't just go, Kia, I think you're great. That's not good enough. I mean, you've got to say that occasionally, but what you should say is, Kia, I noticed that you sorted out that problem and put right all of that, and thank you for doing it. It's really good. You did a great job. And it's got to be a real thing they did every week. So you've got to know what everyone's doing, and then you've got to go and tell them that you saw it and it was good. And people respond much more to encouragement than they do to being told off. So that's what I would have as my top things. The simple things, aren't they, really? People accuse me. I've been accused of just telling people stuff that is obvious. But the point is, they don't do it. And one of my favorite quotes is, to know and not do is to not know. So if you know you're supposed to thank people, but you don't do it, you don't really know it, And so if me going on about it means that one more manager thanks one more person, then, it's been worth it, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. So, Chris, most business leaders assume projects fail because of bad planning. So, what would you say is the silent killer of projects that executives completely overlook? And I have a sneaky suspicion that you're going to be talking about your chart again.
Well, I do think we talked about this a bit earlier. I think the biggest problem is probably not defining it clearly enough at the beginning.
Yes.
And not making sure that everybody agrees what the plan is at the beginning. Because often there's lots of different stakeholders and they all are not happy with what happens because they weren't involved or they didn't agree it. So you got to have that really sticky meeting at the beginning where you say, what are we going to have? And it won't be perfect for everybody, but what's the best we can do? And I think that's probably the silent killer. But I do also think monitoring your chart as you go along is really key. Because imagine if you were running a marathon and it's got to be done in 5 hours. How can you make that happen? And surely what you would do is you divide your, let's call it 20 miles or 25 miles. You would do 5 miles an hour, wouldn't you? But then you'd think, well, actually, I need to do 6 miles in the first hour, probably because I'm going to get more tired as I go along. So you would look at 6 miles, maybe you'd look at 3 miles in the first half hour, right? So after 30 minutes, you'd see where you're at. And if you haven't done 3 miles, you need to speed up just a little bit. And you can speed up a little bit. And it's the same with projects. It's not too difficult to speed up a little bit or to be a bit more careful with the money. But what you mustn't do is get to the last, you've done 24 and a half miles and you've got 1 more mile to go. And you think, oh no, I've got to do this mile in 2 minutes, and which is impossible. And that's what happens with projects. They have a massive panic at the end and it's incredibly expensive. And you don't want to have a surprise. There should be no surprises. So all you've got to do is have, know where your milestones are. That's by then, this is by here, this is by here, and this is by here. And once you know that, you've just got to monitor. And yet companies don't do that. They just go, well, I'm just going to run as fast as I can and hope it's okay. And that's a crazy way to do a project. So I think that's probably the killer.
So speaking to money, budget overruns are actually a major concern. So what would you say is actually your best advice for then keeping project costs under control? Besides what you've just mentioned.
Well, I think it is. Yeah, it's that thing of knowing what you're meant to spend when, and then what you've actually spent when. Because if you're starting to overspend, you need to know soon. You don't want to wait till the end and go, oh no, look, we've spent a lot more than we thought, haven't we? So you need to know a quarter of the way in, the first quarter should have cost this and it's actually cost this much. And you've got to separate time from money. As we mentioned earlier on, if you're underspent after the first year, you probably think that's great, but it could mean you haven't done the work. So you have to look at what you've actually done, what should it have cost and what has it really cost? And then you can decide what to do. And it might be that you can cut costs on the remainder of the project. It might be that but that's difficult. You might have to reduce the quality slightly or the scope slightly. You might have to build your hospital you might have only 90 beds instead of 100 beds or something like that. So that might be what you have to do. Or you might have to just get more money. So sometimes you can go back to the customer and you can say, well, we've been finding this is what's been happening. Can we have more money? And it might be their fault that you're overspending, or it might be that what you agreed, maybe prices have gone up just exchange rates and things like, and then it's a negotiation of who's going to pay for that. Because that's nobody's fault, really. COVID comes along and that makes the project much more difficult and more expensive. So you go back to the customer and you say, look, we're overspending. This is why. What are we going to do about this? And so the main thing is at least and you can decide. And sometimes the customer has done things that have made it more expensive, and you tell them and they go, oh yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, we don't mind paying the extra. You get that in writing then, so that at the end there isn't a big surprise. So I think to control costs, it's all about monitoring really early so there's a problem, and then working out a plan and agreeing it with the customer. That's what I would say.
Definitely. So now, I mean, if you were to look at, making decisions under pressure, this is actually a huge part of project management, right? When things are moving fast, the stakes are high. I mean, how can leaders then actually make smart calls, in your opinion, without second guessing themselves?
Well, it's easy to go, well, just be really clever. But no, a few thoughts about this. I've made a course on decision making that's on LinkedIn Learning. And on there, I've said, if you calculate the answer and you have a gut feeling of what the answer should be, those two should be roughly the same, right? So if you calculate how long a project should take, let's say, and it's longer than your gut feel, then either your calculation is wrong or your gut feel was wrong. Or even if you calculate and it's quicker than your gut feel, you think, gosh, that's very quick. I didn't expect it to be that quick. Either you've missed something in your planning or your gut feel was wrong. So you have to change one or the other. So either the plan is so good that your gut feel, you go, oh yeah, I can see why it's more expensive because I'd forgotten this and I can see why. But if you still feel unhappy with it, your gut feel is quite reliable, actually, after you've done lots of projects, I would say, So the first thing I would say is make sure your gut feel agrees with what you've calculated. The numbers and the feeling should agree. I think the second thing is I would involve your team. If it's anything at all important, involve your team. You don't have to do anything on your own as a manager or a project manager. Teams love to be involved. So if you say to them, look, this is a difficult decision, what do you reckon? Or, this is a difficult problem, what are the options? Involve the team, because there's a thing called the wisdom of the crowd, that the more people who are involved, the more accurate the estimate is. So, sometimes you get, there's a competition to guess how many sweets are in a jar, or guess how many coins are in a jar. If you ask 20 or 30 friends, if you've got that many, to estimate how many, and each separately, not when they're all listening to each other, but separately estimate, right? And then you take the average of all of their estimates. That average will be bang on. That average will be much more accurate than any individual person's measurement. And this is statistical. This is to do with the standard deviation of multiple guesses is always less than the standard deviation of one person's guess. And it's because some people will overestimate and some will underestimate. So, you'll have optimists and pessimists and things. So the more people you involve, the better. Now, obviously, you can't ask hundreds of people if it's a work decision, but to ask 2 or 3 will make the decision better for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I think the only other thing I would say is sleep on it. If you're not entirely sure, just see how you feel in the morning about it.
Yeah.
Because like big decisions, like that person's really annoying me, I'm going to fire them. Don't do anything till the next day. So I think sleeping on it's an old thing, but I do think it's important. Yeah. And a final thought is you shouldn't be making decisions under pressure, because really you should have planned ahead. So you should never be thinking, oh my God, this has happened. What am I going to do? Because you should have thought earlier on, there's a risk of this happening. And one of the parts of project planning is to think, what are all the risks? And then if that happens, what will we do? So how do we make it less likely to happen for a start? But also if it does happen, what are we going to do? So, you shouldn't really ever be in that situation, although you will. But hopefully you shouldn't be in that situation very often, because most of the time you should have thought about the risks in advance.
That's
Anyway,
very
that's
true.
another thing I would say.
So true. So then, do you think there are, or do you know rather, of any mental models or frameworks that you'd recommend for faster decision making? I mean, if you look at the way that the pace is right now, things unfortunately do sometimes need to happen right now, and then sometimes you have to make that very quick in the moment decision. So, are there any mental models or frameworks that you would recommend?
Um, I would use the ones that have always been there. I think decision trees are really interesting. Of if this happens, what might happen then, and if that happens, what are the options, and if this happens, what are the options? So you've got a big tree of everything. I think that's a really good way to look at something. So I do think it's really important to use the left and right sides of your brain. So you've got the left side where you're doing your creative brainstorm and getting loads of ideas. And then you've got the right side where you then assess those ideas using logic. So you give them, scores out of 10 for how important they are and how good they are, and you multiply them and all that stuff. So I think those old-fashioned techniques are still really good. And my best problem-solving technique of all, which my wife even has adopted, is something called Kepner-Trago. And you can Google Kepner-Trago. There's a whole big thing. But basically what you do with it was obviously two people, Kepner and Trago. And what you do, you try to work out when does it happen and when doesn't it happen. So, for example, if you press print and you get a load of rubbish coming out of your printer, what you should do is see, can you print from your laptop? Because if you can't, it's probably the printer. But if you can print from your laptop, then it's your computer that's the problem. And similarly, if you've got a person who, doesn't manage to sell a job, you need to get somebody else to try selling to that customer and get that person to sell to a different customer. And then you can work out, when does the problem happen, when doesn't it happen? And I think Kepner-Trago is such an interesting idea, and it's useful all the time for trying to work out why things don't work, especially on computers, emails and everything else. And so I get people emailing me saying, one of the videos doesn't work on your course. And I say to them, can you view it from your phone? And they go, well, yes. So now it's not my course. It must be something on their computer. But they haven't even tried that, or try a different browser or whatever. So as well as just the turning it on and off again thing, Kepner-Trago, you can do that as well. But try it from different combinations, different angles, and see whether that helps. And I think there's all sorts of interesting problem-solving techniques. But I do love Kepner-Trago.
It sounds very interesting, and I think it's something that that I've actually done myself when it comes to the
Yeah.
switching on, switching off thing. Yeah, it's like, did you try this? Especially my husband is like, are you sure you didn't switch it off
Yes.
when it's supposed to be on? I'm like, oh, okay,
Probably
yeah,
that.
no. 100%. Okay, Chris, I'd love to go to my next question, and I want to find it from you. Choosing the right agency partner is a crucial decision for any business, especially when managing complex projects. But now, with so many options, it can actually be quite difficult to know which partners truly align with their needs and their values. So, what would you say is your best advice for businesses when actually selecting the right agency to manage or support their projects effectively?
Yeah. Well, I think the first part of the answer is, do you just feel as if you're on the same wavelength as them? Some people are just easy to communicate with, and some people, there's just a slight disconnect, and even just when you email them and there's a delay, or you don't entirely understand what they're saying. And so I think if I was interviewing agencies, I definitely would want somebody who I just felt I could connect with. I mean, that's a bit intangible, but I would start with that. When it comes to project management, I would ask them how they will do the project. So what's their project plan? And if they say, well, first we will assess the market, and then we'll have the facts, and we'll design this, we'll show you some prototypes, we'll launch a campaign. If they've got it all drawn out in a chart, I'm sold. Whereas if they say, oh, well, every project's different and we'll have to play it by ear or something, I'm thinking, well, so do you even know what you're doing, really? So I'd want to see a plan of how they will do it. And I don't mind the fact that I'm going through a sausage. In fact, I would rather go through a sausage machine than every project is different. If I go in for my heart transplant, I want the surgeon to be almost bored. I want him to go, yeah, well, we always use the type 7 scalpel, and we always take that out. We whack in one of those, we put in this, we do that, job done. That's what I want. I don't want a guy to go, well, everyone's different. And I mean, we'd have to see when it happens. I mean, I don't know. I don't want that. So I almost want it to be a process rather than a project, because everything's either a process or a project. And processes are a bit boring and a bit easy, but that's what I want for things like marketing. So I would want to know how they're going to do it, and I want to see something drawn. And then I would ideally want to see some previous ones they've done. Show me something you've got that's halfway through, and just show me what it looks like. And if they've got a thing like that and it's all colored in and it's keeping up and things, I would think I trust these people. Yeah. So I'd want to know how, and it's just the same with builders. If they say this is a plan of what we're going to do for you, and by February it'll be this, and March, that's great. But if they say, well, we're just going to turn up and do some stuff, then I wouldn't give them my money, not in advance anyway. So I think it's about showing me plans. That's my answer for that one. I would say that as a project manager, wouldn't I?
Yeah, definitely. So then what would you say is actually the key traits that separates a truly reliable agency from one that might overpromise and underdeliver? I mean, you're talking about the plan, you're talking about having that chart ready, but what would you say are those key traits that actually separates that? Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's the project management part of it, isn't it?
Yes.
Because, all the creative stuff is important, and we can't really assess that. I mean, we could look at their work, we can look at previous things they've done, and whether we like it or not, we would do that. But most of the problems with delivery come from the project management side of things. I guess you could ask them, is there going to be a dedicated project manager? And if they say, well, no, there's the design department, then it gets handed off to the so-and-so department, and the departments just do their bit. That's not good enough, because it could fall through the cracks, couldn't it? It probably will. So I would want to know, I wouldn't ask, do I get a project manager? Because that's asking for the answer yes, isn't it? But I would just say, how are you going to make sure that it gets delivered on time and budget? And if they say, well, you get a dedicated project manager, I would say, well, that's great. Can I have a look at some of their plans? Show me some examples. So I think that's probably what I would look for. Because although that's not it's not the creative heart of an agency, it is what affects delivery. It's the boring part of delivery that's got to be there.
So now, I mean, Chris, in your view, have you actually seen common mistakes that businesses make when they're partnering with agencies, and how would you say can they actually avoid them? I know you touched on some things, but are there sort of these common threads that you've seen yourself? Yeah.
I don't know enough about it as an area. I mean, I've used agencies myself. The really good ones, I think, I don't know if this is a different answer really, but the really good ones, they don't just say, what do you want us to do? They say, why are you doing this? And then they say, well, so if your objective is to do this, then really you probably want to go from a different angle. You don't just want a new website. What you really want is I don't know, a campaign on LinkedIn, or you want to be positioning yourself as an expert rather than trying to do this, or you want to be selling half as much but charging twice as much. And I think I'd quite like a sort of strategic input from them, rather than just, you want a website, we can do a website. You want SEO, we can do SEO. I think it's quite good if they really understand me and help me think about how they can help me and what they can really do. Sell me more stuff in a way.
Yeah, I'm hearing you. Chris, we've actually spoken about this a little bit earlier in the conversation, talking about, just planned projects, budgets that are overrun, projects that are failing, also talking to, what a leader should do to actually turn that around. So what I would actually like to ask you in this question is, what is the best way to get stakeholders back on board when confidence in the actual project is low? I think that's something, if you could maybe expand on that,
I'll start with a little joke and then tell you the proper answer. But my sort of jokey answer is, never do nothing and hope. And that's not really a joke, because a lot of project managers go, well, we've been a bit unlucky, but hopefully we're owed some luck now, and hopefully the second half will be better. And you must never do that, because if the first half's been bad, the second half will be equally bad. You've only got to look at the English football team, or the English rugby team at the moment as well, actually, and probably the cricket team. But anyway, we're not bitter. But it's just, you have to change something if you want the second half to be better, because otherwise it's the same people and the same plan. And so never just think you're owed some luck. You have to do something. And I suppose the first thing probably is get the whole team together and say, we've probably been unlucky and it's been difficult, but we are now behind and under budget, because everybody knows that. You might as well get it out in the open. Everybody's worrying about it, aren't they? And say, we've got to work out a plan, and let's sit down together and work out a plan. So I would get the team together and work out a plan together. It's not down to you, the project manager, to come out with some amazing answer and then sort of force everyone to do it or persuade them. So I think get everyone together and say, how can we do this? What can we do? How can we do it quicker and cheaper in the second half? What are we going to do? And I think that would be quite motivational for them, especially if they haven't really been involved enough up till that point, to be asked even halfway through. It's better to be asked then than to never be asked. So I just think involving people is the answer to a lot of this.
So, Chris, I want to move our conversation a bit to AI. I mean, it's creeping into every aspect of business. Yes. I mean, it's creeping into every aspect of business, and project management is definitely no exception. But do you yourself see AI as like a true game changer, or is it just a new way for teams to justify inefficiency, would you say?
I think it's a game changer.
Okay.
Every time I go on to ChatGPT, which is only about once a week, it amazes me. It just amazes me. And I've recently made a course with a friend of mine who's an AI expert, and we're called Dave Burse, and we've made a joint course. It's on LinkedIn Learning. By the way, you have to pay for LinkedIn Learning, but you can do the free 30-day trial. And you can watch all this stuff, and then you just sort of unclick again, or you stay on because you decide it's worth the money. But anyway, we've made a course on AI and project management, and I've got a 12-step process of how to plan and do projects. And we went through each step and had a look at, could AI help? And it helps with about half of the steps. So defining the project, it's not great for defining them, because you've got to get all the stakeholders together and discuss it. What it will do is you can use Otter or something similar to make notes of the meeting. So it'll do that. So it's not great. But then the next, don't worry, I'm not going to do all 12. But the second step is to list the tasks. And I've always said until recently that computers can't help you list the tasks. So for example, like Microsoft Project, you have to put the tasks in. And it doesn't go, you have missed a task, because it's just a dumb bit of software that you put the tasks, you tell it how long, and it adds it up, But AI can list the tasks. And the incredible thing about AI, apologies to people who already know this, but it doesn't just go out to the internet and have a look at all the other projects in the world and then tell you the tasks. I mean, that would already be brilliant. But it's even better than that, because Dave and I made up a project that had never been done before. So we said, imagine you're going to build a wind farm on the North Pole, right? And I know there isn't a wind farm on the North Pole. And I said, what would the tasks be? And we asked ChatGPT, and it did it. And it just said, well, you're going to have to get permission from the local people who live there, the Inuit. You're going to have to think about infrastructure to transport all the things to the North Pole. You're going to have to deal with polar bears. And it just came up with this fantastic list of all the tasks. So, and that's never been done before. It didn't steal that from anywhere else. It generated it. So, it's incredible. And then we asked it to estimate the time and the cost for those tasks. And it was really good. I mean, I don't know how the hell it does it, because these large language models, they seem to just say the things that people probably would say in that situation. But in that case, if that's all they're doing, how can it estimate the cost of building a fence to keep polar bears out or something? But it does. So I guess it looks at the whole internet and looks at what people would say. I don't know. But anyway, it's incredible. So I would say for something like listing tasks and estimating, it's absolutely brilliant. And for risks as well, if you say what might go wrong, it came up with a load of things I hadn't thought of. And it came up with everything that I had thought of. Having said that, I don't think you can completely trust it. So I would always ask it to do a list and then see what I think of that list. maybe do mine first and then ask it and then take the best of both. Because, sometimes it does just come out with ridiculous things. So you always want to just sanity check it. But it is spectacularly good. It can't do things, it doesn't draw a Gantt chart. You've still got to draw that out. So something like Excel or Microsoft Project, you still, it says it can, but it actually doesn't really do it very well. Because drawing things, it's not so good at drawing, it's better at words. But I want to say one more thing that it is brilliant at, and I'm probably meaning people almost don't need my course now, but the course is really good. But we had when Dave and I were planning a course, we were thinking about reviews. The final step of your project, when you get to the end, is to review it. And I said to Dave, it can't do a review, can it? Because that's, what have you learned? And he said, no, you're right. You have to ask the team, what have they learned from the course? What, from the project, what went well on the project? What went badly on the project? What do we wish we'd done differently? You have to write that. But what it can do that is absolutely brilliant that Dave came up with, or was it my idea? I don't know. But the brilliant idea was it will go through all of your previous reviews for your next project. So if you say, dear ChatGPT, read, I'm going to build a wind farm on the North Pole. Tell me everything I need to know from all of the previous reviews. Here they all are in a file, and you just give it to it. It will say, you've never done this before, but you have done projects in inhospitable environments before. So that other thing you did in the Arctic, you forgot about polar bears. And also you did one in the desert, and you forgot this or that. And then it will say, you did a wind farm a while ago. It wasn't on the North Pole, but here are some things that you've struggled with on the wind farm. The foundations were harder to dig than you thought. And that could be a problem in the ice or whatever. So what it does, incredibly, is it will read all of your previous reviews and get rid of all the stuff that doesn't matter. And it will just tell you the bits that are going to be relevant to your new project. And we actually tested it because we fed in 5 fake project reviews that we'd made. And we said, pull out the bits that are relevant for the wind farm. And it did. So, because at the moment, nobody reads, mostly people don't even write them, but if you do write them, nobody reads them because it would take ages to read back through all those project reviews and try to think, do I need to know this? To find the 5% of useful stuff. But AI will just filter through it. It will pull out the bits you want. So I think there are some fantastic things that project managers can use in AI, but you're still going to need a project manager at the heart of it, saying, we'll use AI for that, we'll use the team for this, and we'll use conventional software for this. So drawing the Gantt chart, we'll use Excel. We'll use the team for this bit, for doing the reviews. We'll use AI for trawling through all the previous reviews. And I think we've now got 3 sources of help rather than 2, because it used to just be software and people, but now it's software, people, and AI. And AI is like this amazing sort of, it's like an intern. It's like an assistant who never gets tired. And every time you say, give me another list of 10, it just goes, okay. It never goes, what? And it's just, to have that assistant I think is going to help. But project management is not going to go away. You're still going to need a project manager who's got judgment, leadership skills, and all those other sort of people things. You're still going to need, and I think AI is surprisingly creative, but there's still going to be a bit of creativity that only people can do. So, suppose you decided to make your wind farm, make all the things rainbow colored. Because that the Inuit love rainbows and they don't get enough color in their world, and something weird like that. I just made that up. It's probably a terrible idea, but AI is not going to do that unless you say, think of some crazy ideas. Even then,
and then it will spew that out.
Yeah. So I think that big first step, that almost vision step, has to still be done by people. But yeah, no, I think AI is an awesome tool, and if you don't use it, you'll get overtaken by people who are using it. So you can't afford to just ignore it and hope that it'll sort of go away or it won't matter. I was doing a course for some lawyers recently, and they said, well, it's not going to really affect us. And I was like, yes, it is. And if you don't use it, other people will, and they will do, twice as much as you, twice as quickly, and probably twice as well.
Yeah.
And you're just going
Yeah.
to be in real trouble. So you've got to be the first people to embrace it, not the last ones,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. So, Chris, I've got the last question for you, and it's sort of taking a look at the next 5 years. So, in the next 5 years, project management will be more complex, faster, and obviously more tech-driven than ever before, as
Yeah.
you've been mentioning with AI. So, if you had to bet on like one shift that will define the future of project execution, what would you say that would be?
Well, I've been asked this before, and I think it's going to change less than most jobs. So I think, lawyers are going to be blown out of the water by AI. The vast majority of their stuff, boring things like making a will or stuff, they're all just going to be automated. That's all going to go. And I think that there's a load of things that are going to just go. And there's going to be chat bots and things. So helplines are going to go, selling is going to be really different. You can use AI to phone thousands of people at the same time, etc. That's all going to change. But I think project management, you're still going to need a project manager at the heart of things. They're still going to be juggling. They're going to be juggling AI along with people and tasks and things. They'll have better tools for being able to draw things and stuff. But I think, Gantt charts have been around 100 years. And I think they'll still be there in another 100, probably, certainly in another 5. So I think it is going to speed up and get more complicated, but it's going to be basically the same stuff. You're still going to need leadership skills. You're still going to be needing to communicate. And that's something that AI is not going to affect at all. Communicating and motivating your team. You can use it to write better emails, but talking to people, it can't do that. So leadership and communication are going to be there, and judgment is still going to be there of thinking, does that feel right? That plan just looks risky to me, and risk assessment. So AI can list what the risks are, but really thinking about, which one is probably going to come up and get us. And you just know what's going to go wrong sometimes, don't you? And that feeling, that instinct, I think is still going to be there. It's there now, and it's still going to be there. And I think all you can do, if the train's going to be speeding up, you know how you see people running after a train and they just jump on the back before it leaves the station. If you hesitate, it's left the station, and you can run down the track. You'll never catch it up. So I think get on the train now and start at least running small projects if you've not done anything, or helping on projects, and then helping with the planning, and then you can help with managing it, and then you can manage it yourself. And then you can manage programs, which are a group of projects. But I think if you get started with it now, as it slowly evolves, you'll be in there learning it. But I think, yeah. But I don't think it's going to massively change. And I don't think there's one thing that people need to know. I mean, they need to know about AI, but that AI is easy. And that's not a problem, really, once you decide to use it and experiment a bit with it. And the great thing about it is you can try it on just part of your project. So you can say, I'm just going to use it for risk analysis. The rest of it, I'll do the usual way, but I'm going to just ask AI, what are the risks with my project? Or I'm going to use it for list of tasks. Give me a list of the tasks, or estimating. And you can just try it. And then you can gradually use it for more and more things until you're using it for almost everything. So you don't have to take a plunge. I think it's going to evolve, and it's just going to come creeping in more and more as it gets better and better.
Totally.
But I think in the end, it's going to be those same leadership skills. They're the key to it, which is great news for project managers, isn't it?
Definitely.
Now, I might be an optimist. We might get
best
blown out
news.
of the water next week by some automatic project management machine. But I don't think so, because you're still going to need the leadership and the communication and the judgment.
Definitely, 100%. Chris, thank you so much for joining us on the DesignRush podcast. You are just an absolute ball of energy, and I just love the information that you're sharing, your knowledge, your expertise. It has been absolutely mind-blowing, and I will never forget about the Gantt chart, and I will definitely be looking at Excel a different way.
Yes.
And
So
I promise
simple
you,
and so good.
definitely. But
Well, thank you for having me. It's been
thank-
great. Thanks for inviting me to DesignRush. It's been a pleasure. It's been great.
It's been
Thank you very much.
absolutely wonderful.
Curious about what top brands look for when choosing an agency? Tune in to our latest episodes where we reveal the decision-making secrets of leading brands. Subscribe to the DesignRush podcast and stay ahead of the competition.